Hey and welcome to another edition of Movie Soundscapes. I'm James Welch, and today I'm going to try and discuss the differences between, or the pluses and negatives of the original soundtracks or extended soundtracks. So you may ask, well, what's the point of discussing this? Of course, being someone of my age, I've grown up having soundtracks being released on vinyl, and also even when the CD format first came out, when the soundtracks themselves, you would get a maximum probably of about 40 minutes music, and that could indeed be the CD as well. Obviously, even though obviously the CD could hold about 70 odd minutes, even 80 minutes, you would normally get a release on vinyl and then the same release on CD. And that was certainly the case in the 80s and to a large extent in the 90s as well. But most, you would think that it would be a bit of an argument or a non-argument. Why would you not want the full extended soundtrack or the full soundtrack to a film, full score to a film, rather than, highlights of the score basically that have been put together to fit what was originally a format for vinyl of like 40 minutes or something, 45 minutes. Now, the biggest thing for me is that certainly in the earlier days, the composer would have a lot of say as to how the new music would be presented on the soundtrack release. Even what order the tracks would go in. They would not necessarily be in the order that you hear them in the film. A lot of composers would make sure that the listening experience was the most important thing, and therefore that was how the music was put together. That had a lot of pluses to it, although often the scores would leave you wanting, you see the film and then you think, oh, I love that bit of music, and then it's not in the actual release, and that obviously could be very frustrating. But I'll just as to the pluses and minuses, I suppose the most obvious example for me is one of the best soundtracks, in my view, ever, and that is Basil Poledouris' soundtrack to Conan the Barbarian. Now, for a long time, I have got some things ready here. For a long time, we just dealt with the album that was released. I think it was on Milan Records, something like that. And some people criticised the quality of the sound, and but also the fact that it wasn't that long. I think it was the original 1982 MCA album. Now, that album ran for 48 minutes, which is pretty good. And that, to me, the amount of times I listened to that album, it's just amazing. And as a music experience, I don't think there's many soundtracks that can beat it, because it works so well lyrically in terms of the music. So many themes. It's so full of description, and you could almost listen to the soundtrack on its own, and it tells the whole story of the film. Of course, having seen the film, you know it anyway, but I think it's become quite well known is that Basil Poledouris actually had a lot of time to score the film before seeing any images, and there's even been people saying that the director John Milius actually edited some of the scenes in that film to the music rather than the other way round. So that's quite unique in itself. But without going into too much detail of Conan the Barbarian, basically, thanks to the wonderful people at Entrada, still one of the best soundtrack companies out there, and they finally released not too long ago, actually, probably 3-4 years ago, that they released this 3 CD. I hope you can see this in this lighting. 3 CD set, and it's a lovely set, and it's got the complete score, of course. Now, the complete score is over 2 CDs, and the first CD is 56 minutes, the second CD is 52 minutes, and it also includes extras after the complete score of 26 minutes. So you've got well over 100 minutes of music there of the complete score, which is double the original soundtrack album. So you may say, well, what's the problem there? There isn't really a problem. There's no problem here. Basically, I've listened to the complete score quite a few times now, and hand on my heart, it's a brilliant complete score. But what do I usually do when I'm listening to the soundtrack? I put on the 1982 album, and there's something about it. Whether it's nostalgia, I don't know. It could well be in the back of my head. But basically, I think that it's slightly more rewarding in the original album, the way the music was put together, and it works as a really good 50-minute listening experience. Sitting down listening to 100 minutes of music, or more than 100 minutes of music, is slightly more challenging. The same thing happened with the Batman vs Superman extended edition. I think that the standard edition actually works better before the bonus tracks kick in, because you've already had most of the music from the film anyway, and then suddenly you've got these bonus tracks that are out of order in the film. Another example is I've got the vinyl of Jerry Goldsmith's fantastic score to Psycho 2, and again I've also had the original CD release of this from Verisa Sarabanda, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong with that, but so I was always happy with it. It's a pretty short album. I mean, there's only 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tracks on here. But again, Goldsmith had a lot of say in the order of these tracks and how they work with the he produced the album, and it's a fantastic listen. Absolutely, and one of the most underrated scores ever, in my opinion. A brilliant, different way of approaching Psycho. Now, thanks to, again, those wonderful people at Intrada, they released the full soundtrack. I think it's the complete soundtrack. Certainly I think so. They don't actually call it the complete soundtrack on here, but basically it's as complete as you're going to get. But basically they released the CD not very long ago, a couple of years ago, and suddenly you've got 56 minutes of music. Now, it's not a huge amount of extra music, but it also has extras as well. The extras come to about 17 minutes, so you've got different versions and everything. And it's a great listen again. It's really good. Nothing wrong with it. Brilliant. It sounds brilliant as well. It's with all Intrada releases, really. But what do I do a lot of the time? I sit down in the living room and actually put the vinyl on. Now, it isn't just because I prefer vinyl. I do prefer vinyl, but that isn't the full reason. It's become such a great listen that I can happily listen to that. Now, don't get me wrong, the CD still sounds great, and I do listen to it from time to time. But it's pluses and minuses. I mean, would Goldsmith have put all those tracks in if he had the choice? Maybe he would. A similar thing here with the score for Rambo 3. Now, this is more interesting in a way, because the complete score for Rambo 3 has come out quite early on in the releases of soundtracks, in that when it first came out in 88, 89 on Scotty Brothers Records, it was really a pretty poor example of a soundtrack release. You had highlights of Jerry Goldsmith's score, very limited highlights, and then you had songs that were put in there. You had the Bill Medley version of He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, that was at the end of the film over the credits. That's fine. But then you had other songs in there by Giorgio Moroder, I think they were, that weren't even in the film at all. So you had the first sort of early sort of example of songs inspired by the film, if you like, but weren't actually in the film. And it was I did buy the soundtrack on vinyl, but it wasn't a great release. Now this CD release is the full score, 70 odd minutes or more than, and that was always a treasure release. It's a great soundtrack and a perfect example of how extended soundtracks or full soundtracks can work really well. So that's a fantastic example. The other thing that I do get annoyed with is if you're going to release a full sound, so say the original album comes out, the composers become very involved in the way the tracks are ordered. They may be out of sequence, but they're there for a purpose that's been chosen by the composer, maybe. Then after that, you get a full extended release of the soundtrack later on. It could be many years later. And just for example, the score, the release, I think, I'm trying to think what company it's from actually. Give me a second. But basically, it's when MGM started bringing out all the James Bond soundtracks again. And the Living Daylights, can you see that? Hopefully you can. I hate the booklet of this thing. I mean, you sort of, it's one of these fold out things, and it's really annoying to try and read it, and it's very, very annoying. Anyway, basically, when the soundtrack came out again, it had the full score, which is great because I'm a big John Barry fan. The Living Daylights is a great score. The bonus track, so basically you've got the album as it was originally released, and then you've got the rest of the tracks, the score tagged on afterwards as bonus tracks. Now, they do feel very tagged on. They're very good music. There's nothing wrong with it. But if John Barry had the choice of how to release the score and the order of the music, then he wouldn't have chosen it like that, I don't think. However, the one good thing that I do wish companies would do more often, if you're going to release tracks like that, then give the option of giving us the track order as it would be if you were watching the film. So sequence the music as you wanted it, as it was in the film. Thankfully, on this release, but it hardly ever happens, they give you the full track order if you wanted to have the full listening experience of the music in the order that it was when you're watching the film. So I've often programmed my CD player for that one, and that's the preferred way I like to listen to the score. But I do wish companies would do that more often. Of course, with vinyl, that's more difficult. Well, you can't really do it. And the Batman vs Superman soundtrack, just for example, I just treat them as bonus tracks and just cut them off and don't really listen to them, if I'm honest. So as to what I'd love to hear your own points of view on this. As to do you prefer? I mean, if you have the original score that you've had for many years, for example, on CD or whatever format it is, and then suddenly they release it again with an extended, it may be 50 minutes extra music. It could be just 20. It could be even 10 minutes extra music. What is your? I mean, do you like to have both and the choice of both? So do you like it when companies like Intrada release like Conan the Barbarian, but they put the original album on a separate CD, so you can have that experience as you used to have it? Or do you think that's a waste of time? So it's really down to your own preference, of course, as everything is. Personally, I like to have the option. So if a company like, be it Intrada, La La Land Records, Verisa Sarabanda are releasing the soundtracks again, like complete soundtracks, brilliant. I think that's excellent. And they're usually very careful with how they order the music as well, which is great. But also, when they do give us the option of having the original score as it was originally released, then great. That's a real plus, and that's how I prefer it. So, of course, there are instances where it's not worth doing that. Rambo 3, for example, there'd be no point in doing that. But I think for the soundtrack collector, correct me if I'm wrong, or the film score enthusiast, to have that, because a lot of thought used to go into the sequencing rather of the original soundtrack releases, especially in the days of vinyl. So the listening experience is still very rewarding, even when you compare it to the full soundtrack release that may come years later. But yeah, let me know your points of view. What do you prefer, or do you prefer both? But to me, just give us the option of both things, and I'll be happy. But anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for listening. More reviews coming soon, more videos coming soon. So subscribe if you can, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook if possible. But keep listening to those soundtracks, and take care. Cheers.